Hello and welcome to another episode of Earth911's Sustainability in Your Ear. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe. You know, taking action to offset your carbon footprint is getting easier, but let me point out first that we need to do more than just offset our emissions. It's important that we both reduce our carbon footprint and offset the carbon that we do emit to achieve a better personal relationship with the environment. So we're talking today with Jon Chambers, who's the co-founder of 8BillionTrees.com. That's the number 8BillionTrees, one word, .com. 8 Billion Trees offers a variety of ways to, quote, shop and erase your carbon footprint. For example, 8 Billion Trees provides a tree planting service to offset your streaming video habit or a birthday party or your pet's carbon footprint. And they make it easy to understand all of those different ways to cut your footprint and offset them with trees. Chambers and his co-founder, Michael Powell, set out to create the most environmentally aware social enterprise on the planet, according to their mission statement. And when you purchase a product from the site, they'll conserve 100 existing trees, in other words, prevent them from being cut down, and plant 10 trees. You can also subscribe to a $43 monthly membership that will plant about 516 trees a year. In fact, I have subscribed to that, and we'll be talking a little about my experience during our conversation. You can learn more at 8BillionTrees.com. Welcome to the show, Jon. How are you today?
Hey, thanks so much, Mitch. I'm doing great. I'm very eager to connect. And, to be honest, I'm very impressed with the following and community you have built around Earth911. I think, fostering this community and this open conversation is, ultimately going to be a key aspect of reaching an overall climate solution that can give us a sustainable future for tomorrow and for many years to come.
Well, thanks, Jon. There is no silver bullet. What we have always been trying to do is create more ideas so that there is less waste. There are a lot of paths to getting out of this. But let's talk about carbon offsets. Now, let me first begin with, why are trees your preferred form of carbon sequestration?
So, I think it's clear that a successful response to the climate crisis and, the growing emissions that we see will require a concert of solutions. That is to say, it's important to have the understanding that no one solution, just like you said, is going to be the silver bullet. From that, we know that trees as a climate solution come in many different forms. This ranges from avoided deforestation to afforestation and then reforestation as well. With afforestation, you have to be careful because ultimately it can end up disrupting the biodiversity of an area in the local ecosystem. And interestingly, we're now learning that carbon sequestration from afforestation is not nearly as effective as reforesting degraded and destroyed forests, which would be known as reforestation. So just to go back just a little bit for those that might not be familiar with the difference in those terms, afforestation is involved in just tree planting in any given area, necessarily in an area where trees weren't necessarily there to begin with, whereas reforestation is focused on restoring and rehabilitating those degraded areas where trees were ultimately there in the first place, going back to our planet's history. In fact, in a study published in 2019, we see that natural forests are actually 6 times better than agroforestry and afforestation, and 40 times better than those plantations at storing carbon. So, that really kind of spelled things out for, if we are going to use trees as a climate solution, understanding how we should approach that and how we should go about using trees towards those ends.
So a real forest, one that is growing on its own without management, is really more effective. How much forested land is left as of today? Do you have a sense of that?
Yeah, to briefly touch on that, according to UN estimates, which is some of the best data that we can look at, we've lost roughly 1/3 of all forest cover. But I think, what's even more pressing and perhaps, much more concerning is that 75% of that has occurred in the last 300 years. And then when you understand that forests are home to, roughly 80% of the world's terrestrial biodiversity, that is biodiversity that's land-based, that really paints a fuller picture of, kind of the impact that we're having, not just for the climate crisis, but what I would call the deforestation crisis as well. And that's why ultimately, in addition to reforestation, it's very critical to conserve and protect what existing natural forests remain. And that's one of the reasons why we work in tandem with government agencies in the Brazilian Amazon to form contractual agreements that protect these lands and allow our teams to go there and monitor and conduct preservation activities. And alongside that, monitoring, the degraded areas that we do launch a reforestation effort in. This is something that is interesting within the tree planting community as a whole. Is kind of the differing definitions that groups have as far as what they might count planting a tree as. It really goes far beyond just planting seeds or seedlings in the ground and calling it a day. Yeah. It comes down to sending monitoring teams of biologists into the field, as well as monitoring fires in the dry season. And when our biologists go out to, these planting sites, being aware of the issues that can arise in these very harsh climates, especially in the subtropics there and in the Amazon and the Brazilian Cerrado savanna. So, having that understanding that you really have to have a full, a full cycle and be full circle on how you're approaching your planning.
Yeah, I'd like to talk a little more about the auditing of the results in a bit, but let me just first lay out some math we did. So we tried to estimate the average amount of carbon that an American household produces. And of course, that varies widely from somebody in a low-income family and somebody in a high-income household, a billionaire, for instance, because of the network of people and services that support their lavish lifestyle, generates an immense amount more CO2. Mm-hmm. But based on our calculations, 133 million or so households in the United States would need to plant about 76 billion trees a year to offset their carbon footprint. Why just 8 billion trees?
So 8 billion trees, was ultimately a name that we picked because, going back to what we discussed a little bit earlier, the understanding that we can all have a direct, powerful impact on the climate crisis. We don't have to feel hopeless. And, the number 8 billion comes from the population now, which is roughly 8 billion, and trying to further spur the zeitgeist, in the concept of one tree for each person. And that is to say that, together, united through taking action, we can, make that direct impact. And it's really going to take that change in attitude and that change in perspective, and not necessarily feeling hopeless or not understanding that, we can make an impact, even if it's just ourselves, even if it's just our families. Touching on the carbon footprint of, the average American family, it is important to note that, the footprint varies very significantly, even within the same socioeconomic class. And a lot of this can come down to things like the power grid that is supplying energy to meet those consumptions demand, dietary choices, and even seeing differences in varying studies that are being conducted. They can widely range in, the emissions calculations that scientists are trying to form for different behaviors and different habits. The Environmental Science and Technology Journal found that a typical U.S. household has a carbon footprint of about 48 metric tons of CO2 per year. That's nearly 106,000 pounds. So it's certainly, it's certainly a very large footprint, especially when we look overall compared to global averages and seeing that, the average for globally is really a lot closer to 5 metric tons per year. So that really, paints a stark picture for kind of the footprint contributions of Americans.
Yeah, and I used a lot of carbon calculators, and I found yours to be one of the more reasonable ones. It didn't really exaggerate my footprint. It also didn't go easy in the assessment of my carbon footprint. So, when I subscribe to that monthly program, I expect to be able to cover my annual footprint roughly. Now, the question I've been asked by a lot of folks is an offset a distraction from actually making real changes? For instance, you offer beef and dairy consumption offsets, or a wetting offset, or a plastic convenience offset. Are we creating a distraction from people who, for people who want to make material changes? And what do you suggest we do? Is it a combination of reduction and offset?
Yeah, I think honestly, that's one of the most important dialogues to open, and one of the most important questions, I think, to shine light on. Stepping back just a little bit, I think,
Yeah, sure.
Offsets is a term that deserves a bit more reflection, and can ultimately open up a long conversation on itself. But, just the term offsets, and how that mixes with a long-term solution is, you're absolutely correct. Fundamentally, we're going to have to reduce the amount of emissions that we're creating. And there's offsets can come in a variety of shapes and forms.
Mm-hmm.
You have things that would be considered, truly an offset, which would be something like a wood burning stove, or something like avoided deforestation and degradation. But I think, those forms of offsets have come under increased scrutiny in recent years, especially. I'm not sure if you've seen or you're familiar with, RED projects, and how, people are beginning to look at those and ask, really good questions. Are you really contributing to a climate solution by, saying that a forest isn't going to get cut down that might not necessarily have been cut down in the first place, and just kind of moving things around on a balance sheet. So I think the first distinction that needs to be made in terms of carbon offsets is, there's a difference between a carbon offset and a carbon removal credit, or carbon removal offset, which I understand is kind of confusing because it has offset, but that's just the industry term right about now as things are developing. But understanding that the solutions that we really should be focused on are those that remove and store carbon, both in short and long term forms. As we discussed a little bit earlier, reforestation of natural forests as opposed to afforestation has a very strong level of permanence when compared to these other agroforestry methods, and contributes to actually removing carbon from the atmosphere and contributing to the drawdown. So, to the larger point, again, it's ultimately going to come down to reducing our dependency, namely on fossil fuels. But carbon removal will absolutely need to be part of the solution as we make the transition into a sustainable future.
So where does 8 Billion Trees run its programs? What kinds of efforts are you making, for instance, in Madagascar and other regions? And do you, as you mentioned earlier, go back and audit on an annual basis to see that the tree is still there? And what happens if it isn't?
Yeah. So, as explained earlier, just a second ago, we're focused on carbon removal through reforestation, as well as organic carbon capture methods through organic soil methods. So true removal and permanence is really the name of the game for success and what we focus on. In Madagascar, our sites with our planning partner Eden are focused on the northwestern coastline near Mahajanga, utilizing mangrove trees that are shown to sequester carbon at rates of more than 180 pounds per year, while also rebuilding coastal habitats concurrently. However, the core of really what we do is our projects in the Amazon, which make up the bulk of our projects and our focus. And I'm sure all of your listeners are aware that, the Amazon is considered to be one of the most biologically diverse regions on the planet. And so, planning there kind of knocks out a few birds with one stone, if you will. We're sequestering carbon, we're rehabilitating, destroyed habitats, we're reinvigorating ecosystems and the water cycles that drive them. We also engage in wildlife conservation efforts at a sanctuary alongside the government organization CFAO there. And regarding successful reforestation and what happens if we find that a tree isn't there when we go back. First, I think, it's important when we begin to launch a reforestation project to do our homework, first of all, and understand, where we're going to be planting, what the specific aspects of that biosphere are for where that tree is going to live. It's important to use only natural species, of course, but we like to go further than that, and we like to use only trees of the same genotype, if you will. So we're collecting trees from the local area and the local forests of the same exact species that we'll be planting. So we don't get seeds from a seed bank, because they're not adapted to the local climate. We want to be doing everything we can from the get-go to ensure the survivability of those trees. And then secondly, before we go in and plant, we need to have an understanding of what is this land? Who are the parties that might be engaged in overseeing this land and forming, those contracts, those contractual agreements from the get-go, so that we have a full understanding and full authority to do our planning, do our monitoring, just like we need to. Ultimately, as much as we prepare and try to ensure 100% survivability of our trees, that's just not possible. And that's why it's very important to send those monitoring teams of biologists, because, just recently at one of our planting sites on the northeastern edge of the Amazon, we found was having some issues with pests. And if we weren't going there to check, every 2 to 3 months when they're just starting to get growing, and then from there, every 6 to 12 months, in this case, if we hadn't, gone to check within the first month after planting, we would quickly have found that the trees, we weren't able to basically salvage the situation and salvage the planting project. And so that kind of goes back to, trying to do things in a very responsible way, and not, again, just planting the trees and then kind of marking that as success and then leaving. In addition to that, we also are in the midst of conducting studies for germination and the uptake rate of trees when we plant them. So we're trying to figure out, can we, adapt our planting methods? Can we make any sort of adaptations to the seedlings before we plant them by using, organic fertilizer or things like that? Even things like, is causing small abrasions on the seed to allow for, nutrients intake to be, higher on the seeds, just different things that, we constantly want to be engaged with improving, our survivability. And then, lastly, the final thing that we do for, every tree that we plant, every 10 trees that we plant or claim to plant for any of our members or any of our carbon offset projects, we go ahead and plant 12 trees. And we find that, that alone is going to cover any sort of survivability or mortality issues. But of course, our goal is, to keep those 12 trees alive as well. Because ultimately, our goal is to plant 8 billion trees.
So you highlight an important issue, and that is that when you go into one of these regions, you're also establishing a set of economic relationships that create an economic stimulus for these communities. So when you, for instance, pick a region of the Amazon that you're going to reforest, how long are you committing to stay engaged with that community? Is it decades? And how do you plan for that?
Yeah, I think that this is probably one of the most important aspects of understanding how we got here in the first place, and knowing that, many of these communities and deforestation as a whole is driven by, immense poverty, and kind of just a situation where, a landowner or community is almost forced to, degrade these forests in the hope for just, surviving and having sustenance. So the first thing when we go in is, a full education for the local community. This is one of the reasons why we also partner with research institutes, mainly Edaflor Bio in the Amazon. And so we actually hold classes when we go into these local communities, and we show them, hey, you don't have to cut down the forest to be able to provide for your family, have access to, the funds for medical care and schooling and these sorts of things. Mm-hmm. By planning in this specific way, by planting these species in this conjunction, you can, have, resources and food and, medicine immediately, while at the same time protect the forest growing the forest. So I think, step one is always going to be educating the local people so that we can try to get ahead of the issue that started in the first place, why those trees were cut down. As far as establishing, how long we're there, we're there for the long haul. We were founded in 2018, so we're still very much new at everything that we're doing. But as we're improving, the goal is absolutely to be there for the long haul. And that's ultimately why, when we go in, we don't just form these agreements with the landowners themselves, but we do them in conjunction with governmental agencies such as Natura Teens there that we work with a majority of the time, which is basically the environmental agency there in Brazil. And by working with them, we can hope to have a greater oversight and a greater permanence for the projects that we're working on versus just kind of making an agreement with an individual landowner with the understanding that, hey, that might change in the next 5 to 10 years versus having these agreements set down in stone legislatively with the government there. It gives us a much greater chance of having success. And that's ultimately a lesson that we had to learn when we originally started our projects there, that to have true success, we were going to have to form lasting, fruitful, beneficial relationships with government and community leaders there. And I'm really grateful to say that, we've had a lot of success there. And I think that really just comes down to, the thing that I just touched on, and they see that through reforestation, through these efforts that we're bringing, there are co-benefits, and, through helping the community. It's funny, a lot of times now, we'll go to our land to monitor, and the landowners themselves and the people that are, responsible for these areas are so excited to see their trees grow. They take so much ownership of the reforestation projects themselves. And so really, building it through from end to end so that, from the landowner to us that's launching the reforestation project in that area, to the government and community officials, having everyone engaged and excited and eager to see the projects be successful is, what seems to ultimately work and keep those trees alive and growing and maturing and continue to capture carbon and provide habitats for animals.
So how many trees have you planted to date? Do you have a solid estimate?
We've planted over 6 million trees at this point.
Congratulations.
Oh, thank you. It's funny. I think when we first got started, we didn't realize how difficult tree planting actually was. And then you kind of get down to the brass tacks, and when you want to have reforestation efforts that have permanence and your trees last, a lot more goes into it.
So what other forms of sequestration do you recommend people consider? And what changes do you recommend they make in their carbon emitting habits?
So, I think the best answer to that question is always going to be to try to avoid emissions in the first place. That's really our best hope towards a sustainable future. Beyond that, I think direct capture of carbon from the air is a promising development. But the economic viability is still, undetermined, and it's why we haven't really seen it take so far. It may be some time until these removal approaches, reach a point of feasibility. But ultimately, they're going to have to play, a large role in the ultimate solution for our climate crisis. As far as habits, from a personal level or from day to day, the biggest drivers of, emissions on the personal level are going to be, energy consumption in the home as well as personal transportation. So, the being able to, keep your HVAC system in your house off, whether that means dressing up or down for the season, or using public places for work and play, as well as, the well-known things of just trying to avoid using your car, or if you do have to use it, carpooling, using public transportation and so forth, can be some of the greatest ways to reduce your footprint, from an individual level. But ultimately, like we've talked about, just aiming to reduce those emissions in the first place, and not create them is what's ultimately going to be the best way forward.
So where would you suggest somebody get started on 8 Billion Trees today? If they visit 8BillionTrees.com, what should they do first?
So I think first, you should go ahead and check out our planning projects. This will give you an idea of our methodologies and our approach to reforestation, and show you some of the things that we're very proud about as far as how we go about planting our trees, and what we feel really differentiates ourselves from other projects, and the transparency that we have, and we strive to improve on. I think the second step would be to go ahead and connect more with your own personal footprint, your own personal emissions by using our carbon calculator, which is, constantly updated with new sources as we're, pulling different information as we get more data. And then, that's completely free resource for anyone to use. And from there, you can see, your footprint. And I think one of the most impactful and engaging things about it is that it can show, someone's footprint as it relates to the global situation and the planet as a whole, and all of its inhabitants. And, that goes back to having an understanding that, there actually is a very strong correlation between, interestingly, GDP per capita and emissions per capita, and just understanding that, being in the situation that we're in, being, in the areas that we live, with the resources that we have, it's important to step back and understand that. And, if you can take responsibility for that by using, carbon removal and carbon removal offsets such as, tree planting and reforestation is a great way to go about that.
Jon, I want to thank you for taking some time to talk with us today.
Thanks so much, Mitch. This was actually a really great conversation. I always love talking through this stuff. It's always a pleasure, and being able to talk with somebody who's very knowledgeable on it, like yourself, is even better.
Well, let's hope everybody recognizes that consumption comes with responsibilities.
Absolutely. I think that's the best way to end it on.
We've been talking with Jon Chambers. He's the co-founder of 8BillionTrees.com. They offer carbon footprint offsets. I myself am a subscriber to the monthly plan. I'm planting 516 trees this year with 8 billion trees. I'm also sequestering carbon with Climeworks and other organizations as well. So you can make a big difference. It is on each of us to start to cut down our emissions, but also to work to restore the planet's ability to digest the CO2 that we are emitting. We breathe out, this planet needs to breathe in. We've cut down the Amazon in large part, and that was the lungs of the planet, as we know. Time to replant that and replant forests around the world. This is Earth911 Sustainability in Your Ear. We're going to be back with another innovator interview soon. But in the meantime, folks, take a moment and share this and other of our podcasts with your friends. Let's get those ideas out there so we can reduce the impact we have as a society and individually reduce the waste that we produce. We'll be back again. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe, your host. Have a green day. Take care of yourself, take care of one another, and let's all take care of this beautiful planet of ours. This is Earth911. See you soon.